Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's Facilitator Training webinar, Early Math Concepts in Your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn Groups, Part 1. It should be noted that this webinar was developed with the help of Katie Sauter from Zeno Early Math, and she is an early learning consultant with Zeno who helped develop the 4 new Kaleidoscope Play and Learn lesson guides related to early math concepts. Katie and I did this presentation recently with participating facilitators, but I'm recording the webinar today for the ease of folks who want to watch it later, as there won't be such an interactive piece and you won't have to sit through such a long webinar. So I appreciated greatly Katie's help, and some of the slides in this content are hers. So I will explain as best I can. And as always, if you have any questions about any of the information related to your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups, please don't hesitate to contact us. So with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. And first, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to participate in today's webinar. As I said, the original was a lot more interactive. We had questions from our participants. This will be more informative, but you will have a chance to learn a little bit more about the lesson guides and the Zeno games that are associated with them, and then again, be in touch with any questions you might have. So first of all, to go over some of the objectives of today's webinar. The biggest one is we hope to increase confidence of Kaleidoscope Play and Learn facilitators to deliver early math content in their weekly groups. We'd like to take away any of the anxiety or fear around talking about early math in your Play and Learn groups, and to also gain a greater understanding of how to integrate early math experiences in your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups, and how families can integrate these experiences at home. And as you'll see throughout the webinar, this really is not about new fancy math topics or terms. It's really about recognizing also all the ways that families are already introducing their young children to early math concepts and helping them to realize that. And then the other is, as I mentioned, knowledge of 2 of the new Kaleidoscope Play and Learn lesson guides relating to early math concepts, and then training in and experience playing with the 2 associated Zeno math games. Those are Stick Figures and Measure It, and you'll be hearing more about those shortly. And because you are interested in early math and your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups, we're thrilled that you've come here to learn more about it. But we also want to remind you that using these new lesson guides and the games is not asking you to do anything different than what you would normally do in your weekly Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups. So we'd like to go over just a reminder about some of the embedded practices in your groups. And these should all stay the same, even if you're talking about early math. So that the group is always conducted within the intent and parameters of the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn guidelines, uses emergent curriculum approach, uses modeling, one-to-one, and large group approaches. The group should be culturally appropriate and competent, developmentally appropriate, offers warm and helping relationships, and responsive to caregiver input. So these are all things that you do already in your weekly Kaleidoscope groups, but just a reminder that even if you're talking about something that would traditionally be thought of as more academic, like early math, we still would expect that it would be the warm and welcoming Kaleidoscope group that families are used to attending each week. And also, just a reminder, because you've all been trained in this, but the guiding principles of Kaleidoscope are important to keep in mind. And those are the following. Play is the work of children, community collaboration, trusting responsive partnerships, respectful relationships, supportive community, inclusion, and quality. And there are some reasons that we at Child Care Resources originally developed the Kaleidoscope Play and Learn model, and why we believe it's an important way to support caregivers and why it's so necessary to support these caregivers. The first is that early childhood experiences impact brain development, and there is ample research to prove this. And by offering these weekly play groups to families in your community, you are helping to enhance those experiences. We also believe it's important to help caregivers understand how the time that they spend with young children can positively affect those children's growth and development. So some family members might not realize what a huge impact they have on the children in their lives, and this is one way that we can remind them. Knowledge of child development and healthy social networks are protective factors against child abuse and neglect. And there is a lot of knowledge that's imparted at Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups on child development and healthy social networks. And it's a way for the participants to build those healthy social networks. So that's another reason. Parents and caregivers can work together on behalf of the child. And so many children are cared for by their parents, other family members, and family friends. And this is a way that we can reach those families and share some of our experiences and support with them. So today's webinar is focusing on STEM, what we're calling early math. STEM stands for science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And sometimes you may see it written out as STEAM because many folks believe in putting the A in there to stand for the arts. And we really believe that STEM in early childhood education is a natural fit because we can build on children's innate curiosity by allowing them opportunities to investigate and ask questions about the living world around them. And we like this quote by Dr. Sherry Killens, which says, "What STEM does is give a label to what you are already doing, helping children to explore, observe, ask questions, predict, and integrate their learning." So your groups will have typically a range of ages, anywhere from just after birth up to age 5 or 6. And we really do believe that it's important to start talking about early math, even for infants. And these are some of the reasons that back that up. First is that about half of children in Washington State are currently arriving to kindergarten without the math skills typical of their age group. And the second is that research shows that early math skills are the biggest predictors of future success. And finally, the preschooler's home environment is a better predictor of long-term math achievement than the quality of math taught in preschools. So for you as facilitators, giving caregivers some skills around this will help create a home environment that's more conducive to children exploring their early math in their environment. And in our original webinar, we talked a lot about what types of early math activities are happening now in Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups, and heard some great examples about felt boards and shape sorters and puzzles and both group activities and child-directed individual activities. And you all do a wonderful job of doing a lot of these math activities already. So sometimes this is just a reminder about letting families know that some of these activities are actually related to early math. They're not purely just for fun, but it's an absolute bonus when the kids enjoy them and they're a lot of fun as well. So at this point, I introduced Katie Sauter from Zeno and wanted to talk a little bit more about the organization Zeno. Their goal is to increase children's competence and confidence in math with fun and engaging activities. And the way they do that is by working with the adults in kids' lives. And they serve early learners and elementary school age children in the communities with the greatest need. So they work predominantly in King, Snohomish, and Pierce County. And they have done, use their early math games with young children and school-age children in the early grades and have been instrumental in helping us think about our new lesson guides and ways that we can have additional activities in Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups for families to engage in this way. So these are some of the math talk techniques that Katie introduced. We're gonna go into detail on each of them, but there are 4 different ones: parallel talk, self-talk, vocabulary, and open-ended questions. And so we're gonna talk a little bit more first about parallel talk. And this is when an adult is narrating the child's actions. So we have some examples here, like, "I noticed that you put all the red buttons in a separate pile," or "I see that you're touching each object once as you count it." And I noticed that you arrange the blocks so that they go red, blue, red, blue. So really talking about what the child is doing and pointing things out. And one of the great benefits of parallel talk is that it's a great way to build a child's math vocabulary and understanding. It helps to increase confidence and allows the child to recognize how math is embedded in all parts of our lives. And it's important to use terms that are non-judgmental, like I noticed or I see, rather than just saying like, oh, I like the way you did such and such. We're really trying to just point these out in non-judgmental ways. So that's one of the techniques. And going on to the next is self-talk. So self-talk is when the adult narrates his or her own thinking process. Some examples of this are, I'm going to be sure that I touch each toy car once as I count them. 1, 2, 3. Another example is, I'm going to draw a triangle. Wait, I forgot how many sides a triangle has. Oh, right, it has 3 sides. Okay, I'm going to count the sides as I draw them. 1, 2, 3, 3 sides. And some of the benefits of self-talk are that they help to keep children engaged while you're talking. So it's, keeping them actively participating while you're doing the talking and doing an activity. And it's a great way to always have child participation. Also, it allows you to model your thinking process so the child can begin to understand the depth of concepts and will be able to also explain their thinking. So it's a great tool, not just with early math, but in lots of different ways to really just be thinking out loud, basically, when you're interacting with your child. And vocabulary. So the other technique is to take math vocabulary and put it into the terms that a 3 or 4-year-old will understand. So in talking about early math today, we will talk about the different ages and what might be appropriate for different ages and stages. But much of the Zeno content of their games and much of the math concepts that we're going to be talking about today are geared a little bit more towards 3, 4, and 5-year-olds than infants and toddlers. So we'll talk about ways to adapt that as we go. And some examples of vocabulary are to say, equal is the same as saying the same, and then holding your arms out parallel to show kind of an equal sign. So just giving them some other terms that might be easier for them to understand. And for two-dimensional, you could say flat and clap hands together to show. And in doing this, we're not trying to necessarily teach these vocabulary words or have children memorize them. It's really just exposing them to these terms. So not only using the words, but defining the words in child-friendly terms. So as I said, you can assign an action to the word to help children remember what it means, like the arm movement. And exposure is what's most important here. So even for younger children, it's still a great tool to use, just introducing some of these math words, not expecting them to always understand it or remember it, but again, it's exposure. And then the next technique that we're going to talk about is open-ended questions. And I know that you all do a lot of this already in your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups. But just as a reminder, open-ended questions are questions that have more than one answer, questions that do not have one or two just right answers. So this is a great way to have conversations around things that we consider early math. For instance, you could ask, oh, how can you tell that you have more or less? Or how did you figure out how many toy cars you have? And just have a completely open-ended question with no right answer that a child can give. It's just a way for them to talk to you about their thought process. And some of the benefits of open-ended questions are that asking questions allows us to recognize the process and better understand where misunderstanding occurred. So if they did come up with an answer that you weren't expecting, if they can talk it out themselves, that might help you see where the misunderstanding occurred. Also, open-ended questions help increase the depth of understanding. It's not just rote learning, but skills that can be applied to new scenarios. So it's more meaningful in that way. For example, not just asking who has more, but asking to explain how you can tell who has more ensures that children will understand more and less, even when the scenario or numbers change. So that's really important to think about, so that it's not just learning the right answer. And then we do know that some questions must be closed and have only one answer in order for us to see what a child understands, but we can always add more onto that question to make it open-ended. And here are some add-on question starters. So if a child gives an answer, you can always add these on afterwards, or if they do something in an activity that you're engaged in, you can ask some of these questions. Oh, how do you know? Why did you do that? What would happen if? How did you figure that out? And what else could you do with? These are just a few examples of some of the open-ended questions that you can use in engaging in early math and really in all kinds of activities in your group. So now I'd like to talk a little bit more about one of the first of the new lesson guides, and it is called All About Shapes. You'll see that it's revised a bit from our previous lesson guide on shapes, but the categories are all still the same. So we have at the top the different items that caregivers will learn, and it's really keeping in mind that caregiver learning piece to be working with the adults as well as the children in your group. And then we've got the key messages, and we've got them bolded out to really know that these are some of the things that we really want to be keying into, like 2D shapes, 3D shapes, and languages to the language used to describe what shapes look like. And then we have some of those different techniques that we talked about in here as well, like self-talk and parallel talk. And then we go into the coordinated group activity and have suggestions for that, as well as some books that would be great books to get out of the library or to get for your group that can really work on some of these topics. And then we have questions that are suggested questions for you to use in your group, and those are in red. So if ever you're planning, you're doing your lesson planning and you want to use some of these lesson guides and some of the different activities and games that can go along with them. If you want some examples of questions that you can ask to get the conversation started, you'll find those in the lesson guide, and they are, again, in red. And then there's some other optional group activities like a shape hunt, shape matching, which we'll talk a little bit more about, and questions to go with those. And then there'll always be child-directed play activities and some suggestions of things that you could have set up for kids. In this one, there's also Play-Doh and then different conversations you can have around that. There'll be the information about the Zeno math game. And for this one, it's the stick figures game, which we'll talk about in just a moment. And then there's a make and take. So there's also suggestions of things that families can do as sort of a craft project and things that families can do at home. And there are some ideas to consider. For instance, you might want to have some shape templates for children to refer to in case they're wondering about the names of different shapes. You can draw shapes on pieces of paper and then they can trace them with their art materials. Encourage children to match the different size shapes to each other or make a picture out of the shapes. So there's always some different ideas to consider or things to try. And then talking about how this adds to the caregiver relationship building, caregiver leadership. There'll be a home activity. And then we do suggest that you check in the following week and ask if anyone tried any of these new activities at home and if they are working on shapes with their child, just to keep that conversation going with the facilitators. So you should all have a copy of the new and revised All About Shapes Kaleidoscope Play and Learn lesson guide. And these will also be available on the revised flash drives. And this will give you some ideas of things to try in your group around shapes. So in the lesson guide, as I mentioned, we do talk about geometry vocabulary in terms of two-dimensional shapes that are flat and three-dimensional shapes that can hold something inside them. So this is some of the vocabulary that we use, that we are introducing. And we could think about, what hand motions could go along with these, and just, again, all about exposure. So just saying them out loud, but not necessarily expecting that children are going to fully grasp the idea or learn them or memorize them, but just something to expose, to say out loud, just to get it out there and have children start hearing these terms. And for the new lesson guides, we also have the teaching strategy goal learning trajectory for the different objectives. So the objective of understands shapes is objective 21B, and some of you may be familiar with the teaching strategies goals formula, but this is a way to kind of match it up to where children are in your group. And so it is divided by age. There's a lot of variance here, and there's not any one right answer, but just to start thinking about, okay, for working with this group of children, and it may be a small group of children that you're participating with right at that time in the group. It could be all of the children in the group. You might be working just with 2 children and their caregivers at one particular activity table, but it's a way for you to kind of be thinking about what level they're at as far as being familiar with and understanding shapes. And then also, even more than kind of assessing where they are now, it's a way to think about, okay, what's the next step that we can get them to? What is it that we might want to work on to increase their familiarity and understanding of shapes? So just going through this really quickly, and we do have PDF copies of these learning trajectories so that you can use them to match up with all of the lesson guides that we'll be going through. But the first part is matches to identical shapes. And this is probably for a 1 or 2-year-old, but again, there's a lot of variance here. But this would be like puts a circular puzzle piece in the circular space or places shapes in a shape sorting box. And then the next level would be identifies a few basic shapes like a circle, square, or triangle. And for this one, it would be one item such as looks at a wheel and says a circle, names shape pieces as he puts them on a shape lotto card. The next level would be describes basic 2 and 3-dimensional shapes by using his or her own words, recognizes basic shapes when they're presented in a new orientation, says it's a ball because it rolls, puts hand in feely box and says it has 3 sides and 3 points. It's a triangle. And then the next level, which is actually, quite advanced and you may not see in your groups at all, is shows that shapes remain the same when they are turned, flipped, or slid, breaks apart or combines shapes to create different shapes and sizes, says it's still a triangle no matter how you turn it, cuts apart a rectangle to make 2 squares. So these are just some ways of thinking about the different levels that children can be at, and thinking about, okay, these are some other concepts that we might want to work on with them to get them to the next level. And as I said, there is a lot of variance here, and we are not expecting you to assess every child in your group by any stretch, but just to be kind of thinking about these different levels and what you might be able to do to move them on to the next as they're ready, and if that's something that they're interested in and that their caregivers are asking about. So we're going to watch a video of one child, and I'd like you, as you watch it, to think about where you think they might fall on this continuum. Great. So, in watching that, if you would take a look at the chart here and think for a moment about where you think that child might be on this trajectory. And again, it's really hard to tell from such a short little clip, and there is a lot of variance across these, so there's not one right answer for this either. But from looking at that, it looked like the child identified a few basic shapes. He wasn't yet describing them, and he did have to ask for help identifying some of the more difficult shapes. So just from that very brief clip, we would think that that child would probably be about a level 2. So you could probably argue for him to be a little bit lower or a little bit higher, but probably right around 2, and getting closer to moving up. But that's an interesting and kind of fun way to just think about the different levels that kids are at, and try to see where you think they might fall on this trajectory. So we're going to watch another one. And again, please think about where you might find this child on that chart. Great. So going back to our trajectory, and just taking a minute again to think about where this child might be on this chart. And remembering that just playing this game with this child, doing this puzzle, the caregiver labeling some of the shapes, and praising the child's efforts, all of that, no matter where the child is on this trajectory, is great as far as exposure to early math and increasing the child's understanding of shapes. So because the child did match identical shapes to the shape puzzle, but had a little bit of difficulty and didn't do much beyond that in that very brief clip, this child would probably be right at level 1. So matches to identical shapes. That the child was able to put the circular puzzle piece into the space, was able to do many, did ask for help for a little bit. And so probably working towards the next stage, but if doing an assessment, would probably still be at about level 1. So again, just an interesting way to kind of think about some of this, of what else you can do in your groups as you're seeing where different children are at to increase their understanding of these concepts. So moving on now. Oh, sorry, I already watched that one. We did want to talk about, before we get in too much to the training on the games, that, as I mentioned, a lot of this content and the games are a little bit more, geared towards the 3, 4, and 5-year-olds that are participating in your groups. So we do want to have exposure for babies, for infants and young toddlers. And so we have a few suggestions, and these are in the lesson guides as well, of things that you can do that that probably are more appropriate than the Zeno games that go along with these lessons. So they may not be ready for the game yet, but some things that you can do is to have some cut up sponge shapes for them to play with, and caregivers can, sit at a little table or sit, wherever it makes sense in your group and play with some of the sponge shapes. And of course, talking out loud about what the shapes are to provide that exposure. You can also have shape blocks. Those are great. As you've seen in the videos, kids love the shape puzzles. And then there are shape sorters, all different kinds. You can try to, make your own out of, I've seen some of like a peanut butter jar, and then you just cut out of the top a shape and then put the sponge shape into it, or other ways of creating one, or there's lots that are out there available for purchase for shape sorters. And then as the child is playing with the puzzle or the shape sorter or whatever the toy is, just naming the shapes as you go along. That's great exposure, and that's the very earliest stage. So never too early to start doing this, and it's lots of fun for your participants. So we're going to get into talking a little bit about the games. And again, Katie Sauter from Zeno did a great job of explaining these in detail. I will do my best, and we are available to answer questions as you're playing with the games and getting a little bit more familiar if there are things that come up. So the first game is called Stick Figures. And Zeno really feels like when you are introducing a new game to the families in your groups or in classes, wherever they work, that the first thing to do is to give the families time to just explore the game. So let the child freely explore the materials using parallel talk. So you can narrate their actions as they play and just name the shapes that they're touching or playing with, or anything that they create. And this can go on for a little bit. This is the first stage, and that's great. And so before moving on to any of the expectations of the game, that they should have time to do this. And the goal, the content goal, is to match, identify, describe, and build shapes. And then the game goal, all of the games have kind of a fun theme to them. This one is work as construction workers by following blueprints to make different shapes. So you'll see that they've got kind of a blueprint layout, and that children can use them to make different shapes. And so the pattern blocks are great for free play and exploring, and you can use those to match to the shapes on the shape mat that comes in the game. And then there are shape cutouts, which are also great for just free play and exploring, and matching onto the shape mats. And the shape mats are used to help children learn to match up the shapes. So the purple mat will be matching identical shapes, and the blue mat will be matching shapes of different sizes and orientations, which is a little bit more advanced. And then there are popsicle sticks that are included that are used to build and create different shapes. And there's also green shape cards, which are simple shapes that children will use to begin building and creating shapes. The orange shape cards are for more complex shapes that children will later build and create. So the thing about the Zeno games is they're super simple and fun for kids to hold and interact with, but they have very different levels. So as children are playing with them, and the caregivers get more familiar with them, you can see kind of what level they're at, and move them along to whatever's most appropriate for that child's development level. So in more detail, the Game 1 panel looks like this here up on the right. And this one is best suited for children 2 to 3 years old. And here are some directions about playing with the purple shape mat and matching the shapes. And then on the little game card here, there are questions that you can ask. So things such as, how do you know the shapes match? What is the same about the shapes? And then you can use the blue shape mat to match pattern blocks and the shape cutouts to practice matching shapes of different sizes and orientations. And again, there's suggested questions such as, how do you know those are the same shape? Do they have the same number of sides? Do they have the same number of angles or corners? So kind of just tools to have to be having, fun interactions with caregivers and children about shapes, and just always, using vocabulary, exposing children to more and more of the language around shapes. And we're going to get a closer look. This is the purple shape mat, and then there's the little wooden blocks that go along for matching the shapes. And then there's a blue shape mat, and there are paper shapes that can be matched on of different sizes. And so that's a little bit more advanced because they're not an exact match. So again, you should all have copies of the games, and just have fun playing with them and trying them out, and playing them with the families who come to your group. And then this is the Game 2 panel. So here we get a little bit more advanced, and Zeno suggests that this game is best suited for children aged 3 to 4 years old. And to play, you pick a green card, and these shapes are simpler and more common. So you start with the green, and then make the shape on the card by outlining it with the included popsicle sticks. Again, there'll be questions associated, like how many popsicle sticks did you use? How many long sticks? How many short sticks? So children can use the blueprints to make those shapes with popsicle sticks, and then explain to their caregivers how they did it, what they used, the short or the long, using some of that vocabulary. And then build by trying to have the child build the shape off the card this time. And again, caregivers can ask questions like, how are the shapes alike? How are they different? And then finally, there is the Bloom level, which is the Game 3 panel. And this one is suited, probably best suited for children ages 4 to 5 years old, and might even be more advanced. There might not be kids playing at this level in your groups at all, which is totally fine. But just to describe, and again, all of this is in the cards and in the description in the Zeno games. But to play, you'd pick an orange card, and these shapes are more complex and or less common. So they're not introduced until later, because we, of course, want to instill confidence and not have kids be getting frustrated or have caregivers be concerned about these more advanced shapes. And then make the shape on the card by outlining it with popsicle sticks. And again, there are suggested questions like, how many popsicle sticks did you use? How many long sticks? How many short sticks? And then the build section is to try to have the child build the shape off the card this time, asking the questions such as, is there another way to build this shape? Can you build this shape with different sized popsicle sticks? And the build section serves as a bridge between this level of learning about shapes and kindergarten. So as I said, this is definitely getting more advanced. So again, some of the other things that we could do around geometry and shapes that we talk about in the lesson guide are shape hunt, shape matching by rule, Play-Doh, shape make and take. So the shape hunt is, for instance, when you want to go on a shape hunt in the room. So you gather a bunch of shapes by going around, and these can be cut out and hidden, or just shapes that are already in the classroom, and then have bring everyone back together to discuss what was found. And then the other is the shape matching by rule. So for instance, with that, you could make a circle with masking tape or use a hula hoop, and then pick a rule using shapes and their attributes. So for example, your rule may be that all two-dimensional shapes go inside the circle or the hula hoop, and then ask children to pick a shape from a shape container. If the shape follows your rule, so if it is two-dimensional, then it goes inside the circle. And if it does not follow your rule, it goes outside the circle. So for instance, if your rule is 2D shapes, then a square pattern block would go inside the circle. And just talking about some really simple ones so that kids can have fun, running around, finding the shapes, and then if they match your rule, putting them inside the circle, and otherwise putting them outside. And then Play-Doh, always a huge hit, but typically just having Play-Doh and shape sorters and shape cutters available at a table and letting kids play with them, but then having the caregivers there to really talk about the shapes that they're using, and introducing that vocabulary again. And the shape make and take could be, you could set out different materials that could be used to make shapes. Some suggestions suggestions are Q-tips or popsicle sticks, crayon, string, and then just ask the children if they want to try making different shapes using these different materials. That way, they can get creative, but you can be talking about the names of all the different shapes. So those are a couple of ideas that are suggested in the lesson guide. And then there's always activities that are suggested of what families could do at home. And these always are things that they shouldn't have to go out and buy anything special. They typically just require common household materials. So a few of the suggestions for this one are explore three-dimensional food items like oranges, avocados, soup cans, etc. And those are kind of fun because opening them up, children can see that there is a hole inside. It's a whole nother level or dimension. Try making shapes using materials around their home. So just like with the other shape make and take, families could do this at home with shoelaces or Q-tips or spoons. And they can also go on a shape hunt at home. And that could be a fun thing that if you try it in your group one week, you can suggest to the caregivers that they do this at home and get the kids excited about seeing what shapes they have at their home in addition to what they found in their group, and then come back next week and talk about what they found. So that can be, these are just some sort of suggested connecting activities that families can do after going through some of this in their Kaleidoscope Play and Learn group. So now we're going to move on to lesson guide number 2, which is Let's Learn to Measure. And again, all of the different topics are, or the different categories are the same as in the other Kaleidoscope lesson guides. And then there's also more information for more resources and cultural considerations. But again, we'll go over, what the caregivers will learn, what the key messages are, using some of the math techniques, and then going through some of the activities and the Zeno game. So for caregiver learning, for Let's Learn to Measure, we'll go into how to help their child make simple comparisons between two objects, how to help their child compare a small set of objects based on size, length, weight, volume, etc., how to help their child measure using non-standard measuring tools, and then how to help their child using standard measurement tools. So we'll talk about these all a bit more, but some of the key messages and vocabulary to keep in mind are measurement, estimate, prediction, and we're going to go over those in just a minute, talking about the ways that we can get these messages out to children using some of the techniques like self-talk and parallel talk and open-ended questions. And then there is another coordinated group activity with some books that are suggested to go along with that. And those books can typically be found at the library or a children's bookstore or ordered online, but some great suggestions on books that talk about measuring. And then again, the suggested questions for facilitators are all in red. And there are some optional group activities. So there's different materials listed, and then some activities like Let's Make a Guess, which we'll talk about, and then some games, and then the Zeno math game, Measure It, which we'll go over in detail. So there are also child-directed play activities, and we'll talk about materials that you can put out, for instance, in your sensory table or at different centers, which would help to reinforce the measurement concepts. And let's see, some other tips as well for if you have infants or babies in your group, some things to do for them. And then, of course, always things that families can do at home to kind of build on some of this knowledge. So you'll have a copy of the new Let's Learn to Measure, and there are some great tips on ways to introduce these concepts in your group. So again, the measurement vocabulary that we want to hit on are these 3 words: measurement, which is just an amount or size of something; estimation, a best guess of the amount or size of something; and prediction, a best guess. So again, there could be hand motions that go along with this, and we don't expect children to memorize these words or fully understand these ideas. It's again just about exposing them to it and having caregivers feel confident and comfortable using some of this language. So once again, we're going to go ahead and look at the Teaching Strategies Gold Learning Trajectory. This is for Objective 22, Compares and Measures. And so going through the different levels of this one, the first one is makes simple comparisons between two objects. So this is if the child pours sand or water from one container to another, indicates which ball is bigger when shown a tennis ball and a beach ball. And then next level, compares and orders a small set of objects as appropriate according to size, length, weight, area, or volume. Knows the usual sequence of basic daily events and a few ordinal numbers like first, second, third, etc. And then some of the ways of seeing this are if the child puts blocks side by side in order of length, says we go outside after lunch, lays two short blocks on top of a long block to see if it's the same length, responds, you're the second to use the computer. The third level is uses multiples of the same unit to measure, uses numbers to compare, knows the purpose of standard measuring tools. So some examples are measures by using paper clips, cubes, string, hands, feet, or other objects. Measures block tower with linking cubes and says, I made mine 15 cubes high. Stands on a scale while pretending to be in a doctor's office. And the fourth level, and they do, of course, go further than this, but we're just looking at, for this age category, is uses measurement words and some standard measurement tools accurately, uses ordinal numbers from first to 10th, says we need 2 cups of flour and 1 cup of salt to make dough, says if I add 3 more tiles to this side of the scale, they'll be the same, looks at the clock and says it's 12 o'clock, it's time for lunch. So those are the different levels, getting quite advanced, which again, you may not see in your group at all, but just to be aware of, where children are going in these levels. And again, we're going to watch a couple of videos, and so please be thinking of where you think these children may be on these scales. Great, so that was the first one. And going back to our scale here, just thinking about where you think that child might be on this continuum. And again, just the fact that she had that little bench there with a real measuring tape, it's amazing that, she's able to play with that and knows how to use it. She maybe didn't, know it fully. Couldn't really say exactly how long the block was, but she gets what she's supposed to do with it, and her curiosity shines through, and she seems pretty pleased to have that measuring tape. So from that very brief clip, this child would probably be somewhere around a level 3. She knows the purpose of a standard measuring tool, so she knows exactly what she's supposed to do with that tape measure. And so that would probably place her about a level 3, but again, lots of variance, and you could argue that she might be a little bit lower than that. We didn't hear a whole lot of vocabulary from her. It was a really short clip, but just to get an idea. So now we're going to watch another clip, and again, please think about where this little guy may be. Great. So going back to our scale, and looking at these different levels, thinking about that little guy who's having a great time at the sink pouring water from one container to another, he's probably still about a level 1. You could argue that he's getting closer to the level 2 with pouring into the different sized containers and trying to talk about it. But he's pretty much at about a level 1, which seems appropriate for the age he seems to be. And so again, just a way to think about figuring out where children are on this trajectory. So we're going to go ahead and move into the game training for the next game, which is called Measure It. And before we do, a note about for babies and younger children, because again, this is another one that may not be quite appropriate for the babies and infants in your group, but there are always things that you can do to talk about these concepts and to introduce them. So for younger children, you might want to compare two objects that are very different in size, such as a basketball and block, and just ask which one is bigger. And you don't necessarily even expect an answer from an infant, but just kind of talking out loud about size. And then remember, it's all about exposure. So using measurement words when talking to the child, things like big and small and long and short and wide, narrow or thin. So there's lots of books, children's books that talk about big, big and small, small. And these are great just to be starting to use the words. And, really, really young kids are starting to get an idea about what this means. So it's just exposing them to it. So we're going to talk about the games and moving into Zeno's next game called Measure It. So again, the first thing to do is just to let the child freely explore it and use parallel talk, so narrating the child's actions to describe what they're doing, and just give them some time to check it out, to see the pieces and talk it over, ask questions, and then go on from there. And so this is the play panel. And here you'll see again some of the vocabulary words that we talked about in a previous slide, but just letting the child pick an object and estimate its size in kid feet. So you'll see the little kid feet there. And then talk to them about estimating and guessing and measuring and graphing. And there's always the suggested questions such as which object is the longest or the shortest? And then the open-ended, like, oh, how do you know that? And getting them to talk about it. And how much longer is the longest object than the shortest object? So they can graph them, and you can just, do that lots of times and have them go through it and explain to you how they came up with their different answers, and just having fun with the kid feet and figuring out different sizes and lengths. And the next is the build panel. Excuse me. But first using the kid feet, and then using a child's own feet or adult's feet, and kind of talking with them about like, oh, why do you think that when we use children's feet, it was a different size than adults' feet, and really getting them to think bigger picture about measurement. And that's definitely more advanced, but it can be fun to see kids' minds working in that way and figuring some of these things out. And then graphing the distance of the measurement between two objects, and the questions that are suggested, such as which objects are the furthest distance apart, which are the closest, and how do you know? And then you can measure the distance between two objects using your child's own feet and then your feet. So these are things that caregivers can take the game home and play with, or create their own with, tracing their children's feet and their own feet, and then always asking open-ended questions to really talk about some of these ideas and keep it interactive, make it fun. So some of the measurement activities that you'll see in the Let's Learn to Measure lesson guides are the following. So first is Let's Make a Guess, where you measure objects with non-standard measuring tools. So these can be things like a piece of string or paper or your hand or foot. So you do that first, and then you use a standard measuring tool like a ruler or a tape measure, and then compare the measurements. So you could also play with volume, like have a jar of liquid and then some cups, and see if children can estimate or guess how many cups it would take to fill the jar. So just kind of having fun guessing with these different ideas. And then the next is how far can you jump? Kids typically really have fun with this one in groups, where you have children start at the same point and then jump forward, and then you just mark off on the floor with some masking tape how far they jumped. And then you can use a shoe or a picture of a foot to measure the distance. So it could be like 3 shoes long, and that's how far one kid jumped, and one child could do maybe 4 shoes long. And you can also use standard measurement tools. So you might try it with a shoe and then pull out your measuring tape and try it that way. Also is how much, where you fill the jars with a mix of items, and then you talk about the different sizes of the items and if one feels heavier, for instance, if the beans are heavier than the rice, and then allow the children to explore how much rice they can fit into the cup versus how many dry beans. And they can kind of guess at that. And then measuring this, where you try measuring different objects and allow children to choose what they'd like to use to measure. So if you do this, you could also encourage caregivers to write down the measurements, and kids can go around the room with their measuring tapes or their rulers and measure all different things. And a reminder that babies measure too. So just having free play, having measuring tools available like little measuring cups or measuring spoons, containers, nesting cups. Those are all measurement tools that babies love to play with. So when you pull out the pots and pans, you can have some measuring cups out there too. And use words related to measurement and size as the babies play. And then finally, put in order, which is the idea of just putting pieces of paper of different sizes in order from smallest to largest. These are really, simple activities that you can have going that really hit on the idea of measurement. So great to have these available in your groups. And then here are some activities for families to try at home with their child. Again, that shouldn't require them to go out and buy anything special. It's just stuff that they would commonly have at home. So they can take their measuring tape or their ruler and measure their favorite toy, see how tall their teddy bear is. They can measure the distance from one point to another by counting their steps, and then the caregiver can count their steps. And again, they can talk about the difference between a child-sized steps and an adult-sized steps. They can compare the heights of people in their family, see if Uncle John is taller than Mom, and talk about how much taller somebody is. And then by allowing their children to help while they're making meals, this is a great way, doing baking or cooking, to get children involved and to help them measure out things, 1 cup of flour, or fill 1 teaspoon with water. And kids typically love to be involved in this way. And just by saying some of the things that, these measurements out loud, it's exposing kids to these concepts and getting them more used to the idea of measurement. So below are a few of the key messages that we want to be sure that we get to caregivers in the groups. So again, these are just reminders that we don't want the caregivers to see facilitators as, teachers or experts in this way. It's more about having a way to have some of these conversations for them to see all the things that they're probably already doing that are related to early math, and ways that they can then build on that. So key messages are that caregivers play an important role in children's development, early learning, and school readiness. A reminder that children learn through play, relationships, and interaction. Caregivers already know a lot about raising children. You do not need to have a degree to have a positive impact. Caregivers have what it takes. Children don't need expensive toys or equipment to play and learn. Everyday activities are full of teachable moments. So I know that this is information that you probably weave into your Kaleidoscope Play and Learn groups every week, but just a reminder that we're not trying to turn your groups into something that that it's not already a warm and comfortable and inviting place. It doesn't have to feel different just because you're talking about some math activities. And then again, a list of facilitator techniques that can support caregiver learning: modeling, presenting and demonstrating, coaching and guiding, setting the stage for conversation among participants, providing written information, setting up presentations, and referring them to other community resources. So at this point in the webinar, when we did the original one with the pilot project, we did have a chance to talk about evaluation, and ORS Impact was brought in to do the evaluation of this pilot project. You'll see there Jen Byers and Chris Chang, who are the principal ORS employees working on this project, and they have also worked with us over the years on the Kaleidoscope Caregiver Survey evaluations. So they were really brought in to help look at ways that Kaleidoscope Play and Learn can be a great place to introduce some early math concepts. And they went into more detail on what would be involved in the evaluation. So we'll keep this slide up for just a minute for those of you that are participating in the pilot. But for many folks watching this webinar, it will be more about gaining information about the new lesson guides and the Zeno games. And as always, we appreciate feedback from all of our facilitators. So if in using the new lesson guides and if you are using any of the Zeno games, please do consider some of these questions and let us know if you have feedback for us. We're always trying to improve our program and to be accommodating to make it work for the facilitators and the caregivers in the communities that we serve. So we love to hear from you. And these are some of the things that we'd be thinking about. And finally, a reminder that this pilot project was funded through contributions from Boeing Corporation and Thrive Washington, and we greatly appreciate their assistance with that. We're excited to have a few new lesson guides on early math and some games that families and facilitators can use, and to keep the conversation going around early math and how a Kaleidoscope Play and Learn group is a great place to have some of those discussions. So thank you so much for joining us for today's Early Math and Kaleidoscope Play and Learn Groups webinar. My contact information is here. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, suggestions, please feel free to reach out. And again, thank you so much for participating, and have fun with early math in your Kaleidoscope groups. Thank you.